Barbarian is a 2022 horror comedy film that I often see being accused of being dumb, having plot holes, and all sorts of boring criticisms like that. However, I think it is smartly put together, even if not perfect, and I think it's a great example of how to use tropes in a film to communicate an idea. Anyone who's watched horror movies understands the idea of people doing something seemingly unwise in order for a scary thing to happen. But the great thing about film is that you can use anything really in a constructive way. And sometimes that includes utilizing seemingly negative qualities. If you're not familiar, here's a quick plot summary before we jump in. In town for a job interview, a young woman arrives at her Airbnb late at night only to find that it has been mistakenly double booked and a strange man is already staying there. Against her better judgment, she decides to stay the night anyway. No spoilers yet, but I recommend watching the movie first. I believe I can confidently say these tropes are here to explore the film's main theme. Yes, this is a fun, sometimes goofy horror movie, but horror is frequently used to provide social or political commentary, and Barbarian is no exception. Here's the main part of the conversation, the most important part, about 17 minutes in.
There's always going to be people that project, some kind of dynamic onto us that serves them. It's up to us if we want to play ball or not.
I just need to stop going back. Keep going back.
This is the thesis statement of the film, really, summarized as why do we keep going back, which of course fits very neatly with the horror trope of characters unwisely approaching danger. Now, of course, I just showed you 3 sentences out of context, so that doesn't mean very much. But this conversation here on the couch is the cornerstone of the film, and you can see the way it informs so many of the movie's events. So let's go into a few things in more detail to kind of prove that.
The guy who thinks love and control are the same thing, and the girl who lets herself become, I don't know, some kind of pet or something.
Pretty easy parallel, I think, to William's true character, as he seems to be asserting his idea of chivalry and conduct onto Tess as his sort of dynamic.
There's always going to be people that project, some kind of dynamic onto us that serves them.
This conveniently happens to describe Keith himself, who is forcing the aforementioned uneven power dynamic onto Tess, despite his superficial politeness. It's up to us whether we want to play ball or not line is really the central conflict in the film, whether the person on the receiving end of that dynamic is going to disengage from it or not.
I just need to stop going back. Keep going back.
And this is the sort of emotional state of Tess. It's a statement that describes this very human mystery, the power of emotion and how it can overcome what you might think to be reasonable and logical.
Or maybe my lesson is that guys will walk all over you as long as you let them. Yeah, that's my lesson.
This introduces a split that will occur in the film, examining the caution women are trained to exercise versus the lack of fear that men generally face in day-to-day interactions.
Okay, take tonight. If I had been the one that checked in first and you showed up late at night.
What, you wouldn't have let me in?
Hell no, I wouldn't have let you in. Do you think I'm crazy?
This is pretty directly examining the film's events through a thematic lens. I think this is setting expectations that the movie's events are ideas and an examination which, in my book, helps give license to look at things a little more figuratively.
But if I was dumb enough to let you in, you wouldn't even think twice. You would just march on in.
Again, very clearly paralleled later on in the film.
I get it. I mean, there's a lot of bad dudes out there. Like, are you gonna stay locked into some fucked up, toxic dynamic that somebody else picked for you? Or are you gonna move on? Even if that means that you may get your heart ripped out of your chest all over again.
This is re-emphasizing the main question, giving it extra importance. How do people approach these situations? It's emphasizing that in these situations that we need to stop going back to, there are still emotional stakes. It's not coldly practical when you're in that moment. So just to summarize those points from the conversation, we're looking at this film that has given us an example of its main idea already in the opening moments. It's reflecting on that idea and expanding on it in the little piece that it's shown you in this conversation. I think there are significant signposts here that tie so clearly to the rest of the film, and it all centers around this main idea of I just need to stop going back. And what is the motif of dumb decisions in the film? It's someone going back against all logic and reason. It's a perfect reflection of this thematic foundation that the movie is setting up. It's using this trope perfectly. This is the idea. I'm a little bit too lazy to do a full video about how I think this carries through the entire film, partially because I think there are times where the metaphor gets like a little bit shaky, and also partially because I don't want to edit like a really long video. But I do want to illustrate how I think the second sort of like dumb character moment plays this out. Essentially, I think the opening act mimics a relationship of sorts, with the house as a sort of like framing of life, if you will. I think there's some support for this within how the film shows the lack of safety and lack of safe housing available for Tess outside of this specific Airbnb, this specific situation. This feels to me like a depiction of a good enough relationship, if you will. One where it's not ideal, right? Like you can see some flaws, some red flags in Keith's behavior, of course, but it feels kind of comfortable, right? When Tess gets to know him, he seems nice on some levels. You know, he's kind of handsome. They have a common interest, things like that. You know, it feels like there's just enough there to be like, and you can kind of see her getting on board with it. But there are worries. The safe lodging, the safer bets, that stuff is taken. And for her, it's better than being alone and potentially unsafe. There's some trepidation on entering, appropriately different attitudes, right? Like the fear and caution versus the kind of like free attitude to a degree of Keith. And they do eventually hit it off, despite some of the warning signs that Keith is showing. They're more comfortable the next day, but as Tess goes deeper into the house and deeper into the relationship, deeper into life, however you want to phrase it, she finds something that makes her want out, essentially. And Keith's dynamic pushes onto her, like this diminishing of her concern, right? The importance of him verifying it personally, stuff like that. But she still goes back moments later, even despite the warning signs. And it just begs the question of why. Why is she going back again? In this case, I think the main usage is illustrating the power of good enough. Sure, they don't spend like a ton of time together, right? Strength of the emotional connection is not huge, right? This is not a relationship we've built up over an entire movie. It's just a peak. But what the movie has done is presented a dynamic that is, we'll say, plausible. A relationship where you think to yourself, it could work. He's kind of nice. And more importantly, it's contrasted it with the lack of safety outside of this particular dynamic, out of this particular situation. We've had the crazy man, we've had the dangerous neighborhood, we have had the lack of institutional support from the police and also from the, HomeAway or whatever, Airbnb. Yes, Keith has problems, but the way the film has set up its events, this dynamic is better than the alternative, which is kind of the essence of a good enough relationship, which I think is being described. This thing that she's experiencing, it is enough to pursue over the unknown, over the emotional rejection, so to speak, the emotional isolation that she might be experiencing otherwise. And that's the usage. Is it dumb to go back? Yes, absolutely. Do we sometimes convince ourselves that it's better to go back when it's dumb? Yes, absolutely. If you're thinking of these things in terms of optimal situations, she wouldn't be doing that. But unfortunately, life carries these emotional attachments with us. We care about people. As much as that can feel like a weakness, sometimes it is a wonderful strength. But sometimes the emotional attachments lead us into subfloor basements. There are more of these situations in the film, and I think they're all interesting to think through because they're all interesting in this lens of toxic relationships and how powerful emotion can be, and unreasonable as well, especially when it's twisted the wrong way. I think Barbarian is genuinely a smart film that is able to get past some of its quote-unquote non-logical elements thanks to some of the framing, thanks to the way it sets up its ideas, and this is all set up right at the beginning in its sort of thesis statement. And this is why thesis statements matter. It just sets everything up right at the beginning, and it lets everything flow from there, and I think it's beautifully constructed.